Happy August 19th. This story of today's devotion centers around Joseph, Jacob's son. Now, on Sunday, August 9th, in Pastor Hill's sermon, he mentioned that the story of Joseph was one of his favorites, and it's one of mine too. This is the Joseph whose great-grandfather was Abraham, his grandfather was Isaac, and his father was Jacob. Hopefully you recall that Pastor Hill's sermon was about expecting the unexpected. He recalled his Navy days and noting how violent storms would come up at sea and how suddenly somebody wouldn't know if they're going to make it to the next day. The sea of life includes many storms which happen without warning, and many of us are living through one or more right now. As a grown man, Joseph became the most powerful man in Egypt under Pharaoh. He played a key role establishing the Jewish nation. His family and people were suffering in a severe famine. Joseph welcomed them, his family and people, to Egypt where food was plentiful. There the Jews multiplied, and over 400 years later were led out of Egypt by Moses to become the nation God intended. But today's devotional is about Joseph as a young man. It's about how a series of awful, unexpected experiences led him to that position of great stature and importance. Genesis portrays young Joseph as a spoiled teenager. He has 9 older brothers and 1 younger brother. Joseph is their father's favorite. Joseph is given the coat of many colors by his father. None of his other 10 brothers get any such special treatment. Joseph has dreams that his older brothers bow down to him. He shows a lack of maturity by telling his brothers what he dreamed. They already resented him for being Dad's favorite. Now they resented him even more. Although he was 17, he was able to stay home in comfort while his 10 brothers were working out in the field tending to the sheep. One day, Jacob sends Joseph out to find out where his brothers are. When he finds them, his world goes from being happy-go-lucky, life is wonderful, to suddenly horrendous. His brothers saw Joseph coming. Most wanted to kill him. The oldest brother intervened, and instead he insisted they put Joseph in an empty cistern, a pit used to store water, while they considered what to do with him. A caravan miraculously shows up, and he is sold to traders for 20 shekels of silver. Joseph next finds himself as a captive taken away by strangers. In just a few hours, Joseph went from happy-go-lucky to facing death by his brothers, put in a pit, sold to foreigners, and then happy-go-lucky to utter despair. Upon arriving in Egypt, Joseph is taken to the slave trading market. Just imagine how a 17-year-old would feel. He's stripped naked, placed up on the auction block in public so that buyers could evaluate him like they would if purchasing an ox or a goat. Could anyone in his circumstances feel like the Lord was with them? But God was. What were the odds of a caravan suddenly appearing just when Joseph's brothers were considering whether or not to leave him in that pit to die? Joseph could have been bought by anyone, but he was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. While slaves in Egypt were generally not mistreated, they were still slaves, and their masters controlled their lives. Wasn't it clear that his God had deserted him? In Genesis chapter 39, verses 2 through 6, tells us this, quote verse 2, "The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his master's sight and attended him. His master made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that Potiphar had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had, in house and field." And lastly, verse 6, "So Potiphar left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and having him, Potiphar had no concern for anything but the food which he ate." Consider for a moment how the Lord was with Joseph. What can we tell from the story? Joseph's father was financially well off. He had a large herd of sheep, a sign of wealth. But what sort of education would Joseph or any of his brothers have had? None. They were shepherds. Shepherds were at the bottom of the social ladder and had been before the time of Abraham. Only scribes and Pharisees would have been able to read. Not being able to read does not mean Joseph lacked intelligence. Obviously, Joseph's intelligence was a gift from God. At 17, he had to learn Egyptian, the local culture, how to make himself useful to his master, things that he had never had to do before. So how is it that Joseph, a teenager, a shepherd, does so well in Potiphar's house, becoming the go-to guy for this senior Egyptian officer? The short answer is what Genesis verses say, that the Lord was with him. Egyptians treated their servants and slaves quite well, especially compared to the Romans. Slaves were permitted to be educated and earn a living. Maybe Joseph, after having earned his master's trust, recognized he did not have it so bad. He had food, shelter, and his skills were recognized, and he was valued by his master. But how would he really have felt? He was still young, a long way off from his beloved father and homeland. And no matter how good day-to-day life was, he was still a slave in a foreign land. The Genesis verses don't tell how he felt or that he recognized the Lord was indeed with him. Up to this point in the story, Joseph is doing well as the chief slave in Potiphar's house. But another unexpected life storm is about to strike. Joseph is described as a handsome young man. Potiphar's wife makes it known to Joseph that she wants to sleep with him. She asks him daily to sleep with her. He continually refuses. Joseph says that he cannot betray the great trust Potiphar has placed in him. He tells her that sleeping with her would be a great wickedness and a sin against God. One day when Joseph was in the house, she grabbed his garment and said, "Lie with me." But he fled the house, leaving his garment in her hands. She called to the men of her household and accused Joseph of attempted rape. She held up the garment as proof. She relayed the same story to Potiphar when he came home, also showing him Joseph's garment. In Genesis chapter 39, verses 18, 19, and 20, Potiphar's wife speaks, "But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment with me and fled out of the house. When his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, 'This is the way your servant treated me,' his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, at the place where king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison." So suddenly, for being the trusted member of the household, Joseph is jailed because of a false accusation. Joseph was a young man, but he did not give in to the temptations of his master's wife. He repeatedly refused. What was the result? He was falsely accused of rape and put into prison. So if you are Joseph, does it feel like the Lord is with you? Is this the reward for doing the right thing? Listen to verse 19 again. When his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, "This is the way your servant treated me," his anger was kindled. It's easy to assume that Potiphar's anger is directed at Joseph, but the verse does not say that, only that his anger was kindled. Did Potiphar know his wife was lying, that she tried to cheat on him many times before? The verses state that Potiphar's wife only attempted to be discreet that one time. It's very likely that the other servants were well aware of her behavior and told Potiphar what really happened. If so, Potiphar's anger was directed at his wife. Potiphar had prospered with Joseph, handling his household. Now that would cease. If he did know the truth, that his wife was lying, Potiphar was still stuck. She'd made a public claim of attempted rape. As a senior official in Pharaoh's court, Potiphar could not discount the claim of his Egyptian wife and instead believe his foreign slave. Doing so would bring great shame on himself. No, Potiphar had to respond as though Joseph was guilty. But did he act like he really believed his wife? Joseph was a slave, a foreigner, a Hebrew, who'd been entrusted with great responsibility in Potiphar's house. As a captain of the guard, no one would question Potiphar's action if he had Joseph executed for such a personal and public betrayal. At the very least, why not have Joseph severely beaten? But there's no record of that. Now listen to verse 20 again. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. Joseph was put in the place where the king's, meaning Pharaoh's, prisoners were kept, not in the general prison. We learn later in Genesis that Potiphar, as captain of the guard, was also in charge of this prison. The keeper of the king's prison, the warden, worked for Potiphar. Listen carefully to the next verses, 21 through 23. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's care all the prisoners who were in the prison, and whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no heed to anything that was in Joseph's care because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. The keeper of the prison would certainly have known what Joseph was accused of. Why would he risk the anger of his boss by treating a foreign slave who had attempted to rape his boss's wife with anything but the harshest treatment? Why didn't Joseph's jailers beat him? Why'd they even feed him? The only explanation that makes sense is that Potiphar recognized his wife's story as a lie. Potiphar could easily have told the jailers to take good care of Joseph. The biblical record does not say that that did or did not happen, but it's hard to believe it occurred in any other way. Even though trusted by the prison warden, Joseph is still in jail based on a false accusation. Since there's no set term for his prison sentence, he could expect to be there for the rest of his life. How would Joseph feel day after day after day? After 8 years in jail, he's joined in prison by 2 of Pharaoh's servants, the chief baker and the chief butler who had offended Pharaoh. Both have dreams they don't understand. Joseph interprets them. Obviously, the Lord enabled him to do so. But would Joseph recognize that? The chief baker's dream foretells the baker's execution, and that happens. The chief butler's dream indicates he is to be released and sent back to his position in Pharaoh's court, and that happens. Joseph asks the chief butler to remember him to Pharaoh, but the butler forgets. 2 more years go by. Joseph, from happy-go-lucky to facing death, thrown in a pit, sold to slave traders, taken to a foreign land, a slave to an Egyptian, jailed based on a false accusation, forgotten and imprisoned 10 years. 3,650 days. Every one of those days, Joseph wakes up as a prisoner with no promise of ever getting out. Was the Lord with Joseph? Yes, the Bible tells us exactly, and it's clear by the end of the story, that the Lord was with him. But would Joseph have felt that during his 10 years? Would any of us? Eventually, it's clear to Joseph that the Lord was in fact with him the whole time. Pharaoh has a dream no one can interpret. Then the chief butler remembers Joseph. Joseph interprets the dream, and Pharaoh ends up making him the number 2 official in all of Egypt, in charge of everything subject only to Pharaoh himself. How is that not God's doing? Joseph, from happy-go-lucky to facing death, thrown in a pit, sold to slave traders, taken to a foreign land, a slave to an Egyptian, jailed based on a false accusation, forgotten and imprisoned for 10 years, and then the number 2 most powerful man in all of Egypt, put there by God to save the Jewish people from famine. So what gave Joseph the strength to endure? He was forcibly separated from his father at age 17. Yet it's obvious Jacob, Joseph's father, raised Joseph to follow God and remain faithful. Joseph was human. Certainly his trust in the Lord must have wavered at many times. But there's no record he ever lost faith. No record of him saying, "Why me, Lord? What have I done? I don't deserve this." When he meets and forgives his brothers, he explains to them that even though they intended evil to him, God used their actions for good. Often we only see God's plans with 20/20 hindsight. Is the Lord with you? Do you see God's hand in your life? All of us will experience storms in life, but knowing God is always with us should give us the strength to remain faithful. Amen.